Venture capital firms are often viewed as detached investors who are only in it for the money. Venture capitalists are blood-sucking leeches who profit off the hard work of entrepreneurs. This, however, is not the case, and tonight, Tae Hea will show us tonight what a real venture capitalist look like. For starters, Tae Hea is foremost an entrepreneur. He's an immigrant, and he was not only able to survive in this new country, but to thrive, as he was a founding CEO of Airespace, which was later sold to Cisco for $450 million. Tae Hea didn't stop there. He went on to start Storm Ventures with the goal of not just investing, but partnering with entrepreneurs to help them fully realize their visions. Tae Hea has a talent for simplifying complicated and intricate topics into understandable insights that entrepreneurs and investors can act upon. A good example of this is Tae Hea's outlook on fundraising from VCs. Simply put, it's like dating. See, he's taken this to the next level as he has finished writing his book, Survival To Thrival. The book hopes to help entrepreneurs make sense of the chaotic journey of a startup. Tae Hea has consolidated over 15 years of experience, both as an entrepreneur and a venture capitalist, in order to distill the methods and strategies that result in success. Perhaps a good way to sum up all that Tae Hea has done is with 2 words: compounding value. He takes an initial bit of value, be it an idea, a company, or a story, and he continually adds value to it. This results in ideas becoming reality, companies going public, and stories bringing entrepreneurs and customers closer than ever. I hope that after hearing Tae Hea tonight, you all will be able to compound value in your own lives. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Actually, that was the best introduction I've ever had, and I've had quite a few. So thank you very much. I'm really excited to come and present because my father always wanted me to be a professor, and I felt like I disappointed him by not being a professor. So this allows me to sort of fulfill one of his ambitions. I'm fortunate that I'm the second son. So needless to say, my older brother is a professor. So what I wanted to talk to you today is sort of share some insights that a friend of mine, Bob Tinker, and I have been writing for over the last 3 years about how to build enterprise startups and leaders. So Bob is a several-time entrepreneur, as you can see here. The first one was a failure, even though it raised a lot of money. It didn't generate any returns. The second one, we worked together at Airespace. That was a $450 million exit to Cisco. And then the third one was a company, MobileIron, that he was co-founder of and took the company public. And it's now about 1,000 employees and so. So this is a journey I want to describe about how the two of us worked together to write this book. And to say a little bit more about me, in addition to the background, I guess some of you in the audience may relate, is that I guess I'm your typical sort of Asian American immigrant. You know, I was born in Korea. We immigrated when I was young. And when I got 99 on my test, my mother would say, why didn't you get 100? If you got 100, it's like, well, can you do it again? And so that sort of became the training grounds to sort of a career going into academics. And in my case, I was an applied math major in college and wanted to be a programmer and go to business school. And my father wanted me to go MD, PhD, and that's how we compromised on law school. So then I went to law school, worked as a lawyer for a few years, and then ended up becoming a venture capitalist. So in writing this book, what we really wanted to do is to help entrepreneurs and founders anticipate what's next and also succeed at solving today's problems. So it's sort of blending of sort of being able to anticipate or predict and to solve immediate problems. And in writing this book, I want to share some of the stories and sort of the challenges that Bob and I had along the way. And as a result, it took much longer than we thought. The first thing is that was really a surprise is that Bob and I, as co-authors, had worked together for 15 years on several companies. And as we were trying to distill our thoughts into one book, we soon realized that we felt like we were watching two different movies for 15 years. And so we had two different perspectives and two different personalities. And at the end of the day, it's really reflected by this picture. And I think this picture is reflective of sort of the different perspectives of CEOs and venture capitalists. So the CEO, like Bob, is in the water. He's surfing. And his number one goal is he doesn't want to wipe out. You know, so he's very focused on what's in front of him and not wiping out. It's sort of wet, it's challenged, and all that. The venture capitalist is actually quite dry in a helicopter, you know, like 50 feet, 100 feet above, and you can see, like, because you're working with multiple companies, you know, like 5, 10 surfers, and trying to help them and anticipate what waves are coming and so forth. So it's sort of combining these two views that we soon realized that was hard, but it's also beneficial. And also from a personality standpoint, you know, being an applied math major, I like models a lot and frameworks. I don't work well if I don't understand the big picture. Bob, on the other hand, doesn't really care about the big picture of the model, and he just wants to solve today's problem so he doesn't wipe out. The other sort of surprising thing we found is that writing actually turned out to be a great form of stress relief. You know, I'd come back working with a situation. It was a difficult situation with a founder, an entrepreneur, CEO, and I'd write about something, and Bob would say, you know, you definitely had a bad day at the office or something about that. And then he would polish it and sort of sanitize it and so forth. But we found that writing about challenges and so forth is a great way of stress relief. And also, it caused us to really think through and analyze sort of what worked and what doesn't work. You know, I worked with like over 100 CEOs, and I have like the spreadsheet of all the CEOs I've worked with and sort of what I anticipated and what had happened later, and trying to figure out, you know, looking for patterns of success and failure. The other thing that was great is that we were fortunate that we just had a lot of support from other venture capitalists, friends, other founders, and we were fortunate that we have like 60 portfolio companies that we can sort of test these ideas and drafts of the book out. So we really appreciated all their help and feedback along the way. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't really about us, but how to make this successful. The thing we did not anticipate is that how hard it was going to be. We thought it was a 6-month project, and it's turned out to be over 3 years. And we're still not done yet because we finished the first book, but not the second. And during this process now, my wife calls herself a book widow because I'll be there physically, but not mentally as I'm sort of typing away. The reason why we worked on such a project for so long is, you know, a lot of people helped us in each of our companies over many years. And in a way, that's part of the ethos of Silicon Valley, where founders help other founders, entrepreneurs help other entrepreneurs. And so we felt that this is a way that we can sort of pay back and sort of just provide our insights in a more formal, sort of structured manner. And by the way, I'm happy to answer any questions during the presentation or afterwards as well, too. And so the first book was over 42 drafts. At the beginning, we actually had dueling chapters because we had such different views of the journey. And the second book we're on right now is on draft 70 and is taking much longer than we thought, but we're almost done. The second book is The People Journey, and in a way, the people journey is about how not to get fired, and that's why it's taking a little bit longer as we're working on this. So the first insight that we have that we want to share is really on this question about how to build an enterprise startup. And we picked enterprise or B2B because that's where we've really focused on for the last few decades. And we thought that providing one format for one type of company is the best thing to do. But some of the principles can be applied to others. So what we found is that startups, enterprise startups, go through a journey. it's very much like raising a child. In other words, day to day, nothing changes really, but there'll be some dramatic moments like, going to elementary school or going off to college, getting married, taking care of your parents are sort of major transition points. And in the same way, we found startups go through 5 different stages of founding the company, finding product market fit, finding go-to-market fit, accelerating a category leader, and becoming a sustainable industry leader. And we'll talk a little bit about each stage in a little bit. But what's hard is that as you go from one stage to another, it's like the whole company changes. So the strategy, execution, what kind of people you need changes as you go from one stage to the next. So what made you successful at one can actually hurt you or damage you at the next. And we'll talk about that as well too. So at the beginning of the company, the founding stage is actually the most exciting stage because I feel like you can do anything and everything. So it's a very exciting and dynamic stage, but it really sets the foundation of the company. And so key questions are like, who do you pick as your founders? How do you split founder equity? And how do you, as the initial founders, define the culture of the company as you build the company long term, or some of the things that are really important. And one thing that comes out that's like extremely important to Bob is this whole idea of founder oath, where what the founders are saying is that the mission and the success of the company is more important than any individual success. So after founding the company, the next phase is getting product market fit, which is getting some customers, and there's a lot of startup literature about how to find product market fit, lean startup, and so forth. So at that stage, you want to get to product market fit, and you achieve product market fit, and the paradoxical thing is that it's probably the most unhappy time in the company. On one hand, you wonder it should be a happy time because you found product market fit, you've got some paying customers, life is good. But it turns out to be really stressful because on one hand, you have the success, but on the other hand, you're just not accelerating growth. And so this sort of difference in expectations that you see here between the plan and reality, the mismatch, is what's causing this high stress as companies have 20, 40 employees, they're burning a lot of money, running out of cash, and not being able to accelerate growth. The next phase we talk about, and the reason why we emphasize this is that the magic happens is that when you find go-to-market fit, and it really marks the transition point from survival to thrival. From an investor standpoint, it's the difference between losing money and making money. We find any company that's found go-to-market fit, in general, we make money. If they don't, then it's 50-50. So we love it, and what go-to-market fit delivers is this ability to find this sort of predictable, repeatable, scalable growth. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we think of how to find go-to-market fit. After go-to-market fit, and you sort of now know how to scale, what the growth formula is, it's a race. Because if you found it, probably someone else has found it, or they've seen you found it. So now it's a race to become a category leader. And category leaders in general are the ones that are the unicorns. What we mean by a category leader is first you have to have a category, which is a large independent market, versus a feature or just an add-on to something, but a real large independent market. And the leader is the fastest growing. So if you're the category leader, then people are excited because it's primarily a winner-take-all world of whether you like it or not. So what happens is that people believe the category leader will get the most gains, and so as a result, they raise the most money, and they can hire the best people, and then they get more customers, so that reinforces your view of category leaders, so they raise even more money. So you get this virtuous cycle that can cause a company to just scale unbelievably quickly. And there are tens of billions of dollars waiting to just sort of invest within these category leaders. And then the next fifth challenge that we talk about is a bit more distant, is that how do you transcend your category to basically be dominant in multiple categories and become an industry leader? So this is something that we write about in the book, is sort of a guide for founders and entrepreneurs, is to sort of explain the journey of a startup from founding all the way to an industry leader, let's say doing about $1 billion in revenue or so. Yes.
So you talked about doing this for enterprise, for
Yes.
business to consumer.
Yes.
How is it different, or is it different if you're doing a startup that's to consumers? I mean, business to business versus enterprise versus
Yes. So the big difference between B2C and B2B is sort of how buying decisions are made. In other words, with consumers, the buying decisions really, they're just individual. So a person can decide on a day, on a whim, I like this app, I want to start using it. Usually on the business side, it's rare that you have one person that can make that decision. Like, for example, if UC Berkeley wanted to buy a new type of software to be used in the business school, let's say, usually there's a business champion that wants it, but then it goes to like IT, there may be a security audit, then there's like, is there budget? And so finance may get involved. So in a business, it's more of a committee. That's a buying process. And so go-to-market between the two is different. So that in consumer, in general, if you have go-to-market, if you have product market fit that people like and is viral, it can take off exponentially. Whereas in enterprise, that rarely happens because of the buying process is different. And so this idea of go-to-market is much more important for enterprise or B2B than it is to B2C because of the buying decision. But that's a great question. So the second thing I want to talk about is, since I talked about go-to-market so much and go-to-market fit as the key transition point, is how do you find go-to-market fit? And we talk about this a lot, and we've held workshops, and we are applying it. We have like 60 companies to test it with, so it's something near and dear to us. So today, I wanted to share with you is sort of just a high-level view, and that is, in a traditional way of go-to-market, it's really based on these two concepts. One is you sell through relationships. People that or you get an introduction from someone and they'll make. So you sell through relationships. And the second is that you see a lot about sort of founder hero selling, where the founder or the CEO goes out and meets with customers, explains why this is so great and compelling, and it works. I was just in Korea last week and talking to various founders, entrepreneurs in the B2B side, and this is sort of typically how they go to market. It's about relationships, and you can tell because the first question they ask is, who do you know? Not what you know, but who do you know? And then the second is, this idea of the founders doing it themselves. What happens, though, the problem is that neither one scales. So if you can think about how to do go-to-market in a manner which is repeatable and scalable, then and think of it as a science or a machine, then it's something that it scales much better. Because the founder may be a great person that sells, but you can't hire another 100 founders. It's a finite pool. And so what we found is that for enterprise companies, the way of getting go-to-market fit is really to have these three elements. And the idea here isn't the details, but just sort of the general idea. The first is really to line up with an urgent wave. And what that does is it answers the question, the urgency is, why should someone buy now versus 6 months from now or 12 months from now, but always like, why should I do something today? Especially because on the B2C side, people are doing it because they enjoy it, they like it, or there's peer pressure, whatever. On the enterprise side, people if they have to buy something today, it's because there's some business or they have to do. So it's a very different reason of like, why buy now? Especially if you have someone that has to approve the budget and all that. So, you have to go and persuade them why you have to get budget and all that to buy it. So why buy now? And then second is that if you can tie it with an aspirational goal so that this becomes not like a Band-Aid, but something that can become something strategic to the customer, so it's part of a larger wave. Like let's say they want to understand, like here in the university, how to engage with students better. Like I know universities right now really care about student engagement and student success. So if you have a product that can help drive student success, then that is a major strategic or an aspirational goal of the customer. And so if you link those two, the urgent pain of why today with something aspirational, then that's what we call lining up with this urgent wave, because the wave is that sort of strategic tidal wave that will come and carry you to become very important to your customer. And then the second is that picking a go-to-market model which matches how a customer decides to buy. And what you're going to find is that there are so many different go-to-market models, whether it's sales-led, marketing-led, product-led, or freemium, and there's a new flavor of the month, especially as we investors like to talk about. And so there's so many. But the key is to just find one that matches how your customer decides to buy. And we say decide to buy for the reason we talked about is that at the enterprise is about how they make that buying decision. And then lastly, having this sort of repeatable go-to-market playbook, which is like 1 to 2 pages. If it's like 30, 60 pages, then no one reads it. But if it's 1 or 2 pages, then you can hire new employees for sales and marketing or others, and they know exactly what to do. And so we found that these 3 elements to be very important. Yes?
So you were saying before you're the model guy.
Mm-hmm.
So you've worked with so many successful companies. Mm-hmm. I am curious to know which of the go-to models from the companies that you've worked with you think are kind of interesting. It'd be kind of fun to hear your vision from one of those companies.
Yes. In fact, that's another, so in the book, we actually talk in detail about 3 go-to-market models. One is sales-led, one is marketing-led, and one is product-led. And for sales-led, we give the example of MobileIron, where they now have about 300 sales reps, going from 1 to 300, and we provide a sample of their playbook in it. The second one for marketing-led is a company, Marketo. I was on the board of Marketo. It just got sold to Adobe for about $5 billion. And there, we're talking about marketing-led, in particular, how using thought leadership to create demand and that urgency to buy and that aspirational through thought leadership. And then you would use light sales to close, like inside sales versus field sales. And then the third one we give as an example, product-led, is where you have no salespeople, and that would be a company like SendGrid. It turns out that product-led works very well in engineering, because engineers don't like to meet salespeople. And so if you have a product, so engineers don't like to meet salespeople, and second is that in engineering, many times, the buyer and the user is the same person. So the user decides whether the person they're going to use it or not, and also has budget to buy it. And in that case, they can buy with a credit card or other things, and so the buying process goes fairly quickly. And so we find that product-led works very well for these kind of basically self-service engineering purchase decisions. Yes, so we provide those 3 examples, and we talk to the CEOs of those companies to have them help explain in detail and so forth. So this is something that Bob really says emphasizes, and is that as we talk about all this, because I'm more theoretical, as I said, I like the models, but for Bob, it's also important to convey when we talk about things is like, what does it feel like? because that kind of developing that intuition, all that is important. Is that when you have go-to-market fit, it feels like you're surfing a wave. In other words, that wave that's why we say it's important to line up with that urgent wave. So that's sort of pushing you, and you're lined up, and you have this playbook, and so you're just surfing the wave. And it's amazing the feeling and the success of the company. Versus when you don't have it, it's like you're just continually paddling. And it's very exhausting as you're paddling. But what you want to do is paddle until you position yourself to ride that wave. And given that, what we've been doing is doing a lot as a firm to just sort of share this idea of, why go-to-market fit is important. We provide samples, we're doing webinars, other things, to just sort of help, because this is sort of something that, we and Bob and I really enjoy doing. The third thing I want to talk about, and this is the second book that's not out yet, but it's getting close, is the people journey. So the first book, as I mentioned, is the company journey. A company going through these 5 stages, and the most important stage is finding go-to-market fit, because that's the transition from survival to thrival. So the next one to talk about is the people journey, and we deliberately separated these 2 books, because initially we were thinking about it as one, because after all, company and people are interrelated in the journey. And we separated the 2 because as soon as you start talking about people journey, it's about people succeeding and failing. It's about people getting promoted or fired, getting raises or not. So the personal side of it overwhelms everything. And what we wanted to do instead is to first agree on what the company journey is, and as a result, agree on how and why the company changes, and then as a result, to understand how that impacts the individual. And that's what you're going to see, and that's sort of the framework that we have for here. So what's really hard about the people journey and the startup life is really illustrated by this picture right here. I mean, I think a lot of people know about the story about, boiling the frog, right? You put the frog in, and if you immediately turn up the temperature, the frog jumps out. But if you raise it slowly 1 degree at a time, then the frog just stays, right? And unfortunately, bad things happen to the frog. So in a way, life of a leader in a startup is sort of like this. And what happens is that what's the fire is the company growth. So the thing that we talked about in the beginning, finding go-to-market fit, accelerating growth, all this thing that we want in the company growth is going to cause problems for the individual, that either the individual is going to change in response, or the company to succeed will have to change the individual. And that's what we'll talk about next. So the first slide was more of an emotional way of understanding this. This is more of an analytical way of understanding it. So what happens is that when the company changes, growth causes the company to change, like you go through these 5 stages, is that the company changes, and what that causes is roles to change, even though the title doesn't. So if you're the CEO of the company, it's like the company, as it changes, it's a different CEO job or a different VP of sales job, but title doesn't change, compensation doesn't change, responsibilities don't change. And so people don't understand that the role is changing from an old role to a new role until maybe it's too late. And so what we want to do through this second book is to sort of make this more, analytical, and so people can anticipate the change and why and so forth. And we'll share a little bit of this today. So what happens is that when the role changes, it's important to learn the new role, like the new CEO or the new VP of sales. But even more important is to unlearn the old role. And this idea of unlearn, we think is really important, because that's the key to sort of transitioning from one stage to the next. And so this is actually Bob's favorite philosopher, Yoda. and that you have to unlearn what you have learned. So to make this even clearer, I want to sort of give you an example of sort of two roles. One is VP of Sales, and the other is going to be CEO. So at the beginning of the company, as I mentioned in the founding of the company, trying to get product market fit, and then trying to find go-to-market fit. As I said, this idea of finding go-to-market fit is, you're trying to find this sort of repeatable, scalable formula. Another way of looking at it is that the best VP of Sales you want is someone like a Davy Crockett, who's a great pioneer, who can find the path through the wilderness. He discovered the path through the Appalachian Mountains from the East Coast and over. And the kind of pioneer is someone that doesn't get intimidated, when they see Indians, or doesn't get intimidated if they're running out of food. If there's no map, it's okay, they make the map. So this kind of pioneer turns out to be the best VP of sales at the beginning, the best sales leader at the beginning of the company, as you're going from founding to getting this sort of figuring out your go-to-market fit formula. Once you have that path, the best VP of sales is like Mel Gibson in Braveheart, or Joan of Arc. You want a real warrior leader that even if you're outnumbered 1,000 to 1 because you're fighting the big giants, there's no fear, you can recruit other great warriors and you go out and you win deals. And so it turns out that that's the kind of leader that you want. And so getting someone to unlearn being a pioneer and being this warrior leader is very different. And so to make that transition, you need to learn this and to unlearn being a pioneer and becoming this, as I said, this sort of warrior leader that you see. And that's great until as you get like 50 sales reps, maybe 100, and you've got this sort of great warrior army, that will basically go into any battle with you to win. But then, as the company keeps growing, and you now start getting hundreds and so forth, you need a different kind of VP of sales. You need someone like Dwight Eisenhower. Dwight Eisenhower, by the way, mark on him was that he never fought in battle. So they were saying, how can you be a general if you never fought in battle? But what he was very good at was forming this coalition of other warrior leaders like Patton, Montgomery, whether they're British or American or Canadian, and getting them all work together toward this sort of master plan of winning in Europe. And so you're looking for someone who's a great architect, who can manage egos, the different warrior leaders and so forth. And to make that transition, what's important is to unlearn being a warrior. And we've interviewed like a very successful VP of sales that went through this process. The first time it didn't work for the person, and next time it did. And that, this idea of unlearning being a warrior is really hard because, in a sense, what you're so proud of, because it's what I'm so good at, it's like saying, that's not important anymore. And so it caused like this idea of sort of internal fear of like, does the emperor have no clothes, So it creates that sort of fear. Also, for him, it was really hard because as he was going through this transition, all the people he hired as warriors said, you've gone corporate, you're no longer a warrior, and lost respect of the fellow warriors. And that was very hard on him as well, too. So, making this transition and sort of giving up that kind of warrior spirit where you go in, you close deals, you do everything for your fellow warriors and so forth was a big change. In the same way, CEOs go through change, too. In the beginning, the best kind of CEOs we found are like Captain America, Captain America in the sense of, you lead by example, you're involved in all aspects of the business. I mean, you can relate to everyone. And it's very effective up to about like 30, 40 people, maybe 50, depending upon the person, but there's a limit. Then the CEO needs to transition from being Captain America to sort of now leading a band of Avengers, where each Avenger has more, superpower than the CEO in that particular area. And so how do you manage a band of Avengers? It's about how do you relinquish control while still maintain overall control. And so we talk about different ways of doing this and sort of give specifics, because Bob likes punchlines, so it has to be very practical. But what I share is just sort of more of sort of the concept behind as you go through this. And then as the company gets even bigger, what becomes important is that the CEO, in a sense, becomes like Dr. Xavier and the X-Men, where it's not just the Avengers, but about how to build an entire organization, or as you're empowering people. And this is where culture becomes profoundly much more important for the company, about creating the right mission and process and so forth. So we talk about this sort of transition about how people that can be so successful in one to succeed will need to do this. And what we find is that these sort of three roles is consistent throughout. We talked about VP of Sales, we talked about CEO. In the book, we also talked about, like, if you're a finance person or an engineering person, how those roles change too as you go from the beginning of the company, which is like a survival role, where you're trying to find this product market fit, go-to-market fit. Then you're in this sort of super accelerated growth mode, which is to become category leader. And then the next is as you want to transcend the category and become involved in multiple categories, it's about a scale role. And these are three distinct roles, even though the title is the same. And understanding that's important, because then understanding the skill set and everything required in this transition. And so what happens is that, to keep in mind, is the things that make you very successful in A to B, in other words, that Davy Crockett pioneer, very successful, it can be the very things that hold you back or kill you at the next stage. And that's why we said it's important to unlearn what makes you so successful at one stage, because it may not apply to the next. Because what we find is that the natural reaction is, when things get harder, is to do more of what you're good at. Because that is the natural inclination of people. So we realized that as going through this, it's really hard, because it's like unwiring an individual. And this is why we're on version 70 of this book right now. But we're very close. It's very hard, but what it's like really is that you're trying to unwire yourself while at the same time this airplane, which is the company, is trying to take off. So it is this process of how you're trying to change the person as you're running the company to take off. So I'll give you like another example of a challenge which is really hard for a CEO. So let's say you're a CEO of a company, and you know that you're going through this change where you want a VP of sales to go from Mel Gibson to a Dwight Eisenhower. You need that change. And you're deciding, can this VP of sales make the transition or not? And you think about it, if you move too fast, other executives and employees think you have no loyalty. It's like all of a sudden you become successful, you divorce your wife, and you get a trophy wife. So they think you have no loyalty. So if you move too fast, they think you have no loyalty to people that work so hard to make you successful. At the same time, if you move too late, so you're delayed in making the transition and the company is starting to suffer, then the executives, the board, the employees will think that the CEO is indecisive. Can't make the tough decisions required to make the company successful. So, the CEO has this sort of balance between going too fast or too late. And that kind of decision, by the way, if you're a fast growth company, can be about 6 months. or 3 months. So in that time period, perceptions change.
So I'm sorry, I was on my phone because I was trying to literally look down at all the positions where you've been on the board of directors. So I'm curious to know, what role does the board of directors play in this kind of a transition? Or could they ideally play?
Well, the board can play a huge role. And the first thing is that the board actually can cause a lot of problems. Okay, I'll give you an example, related to what I was just going through. So, this is a case where the CEO is trying to just, being viewed as sort of, loyalty versus indecisive, right? Well, what most likely is that 6 months ago or a year ago, 6 months ago, this VP of sales was doing a phenomenal job because they needed a Mel Gibson and this person was Braveheart. So great job. So I remember a CEO comes in and says, I've got a phenomenal VP of sales. I think so highly of this person. If we ever sell the company, you should hire this VP of sales as CEO of another startup. Says all these things. Company goes through this transition, and now 6 months later, CEO comes in and says, I got to change the VP of sales. So the first time I heard this, I was thinking, what is the CEO thinking? What is going on that causes a person in 6 months to go 180 degrees on this? And then you wonder, well, could it have been this, that, personalities, whatever. And it was just literally the company had changed stages. And so I think, the board understanding the journey can help the CEO make the right decisions along the way. The flip side of it is that not understanding the journey can detract from the CEO in making the right decisions. I'll give you another story about a company. I had a friend that was in one of the companies that we invested in, and so he told me this later, is that if you're in a board meeting and a board member says, let's say, 10 different things, 10 points, they would spend the next 3 days without the board, but just amongst the management team debating those 10 points. Because usually what happens is if you say 10 things or 20 things, you're just saying a lot of random things. It's not like just one concentrated message. And within the management team, there's always the difference of, one person wants to do this, one person wants to do this, another person wants to do that. And so those 10 things get used by different groups in different ways, and sort of forming consensus and direction can be difficult. So that you can actually cause chaos, or you can cause a tax on the company as well, too, on the decision-making of the company. Because at the end of the day, the board has two major decisions, which is hiring and firing a CEO, and selling the company or not. And so it has a big impact through those decisions. So just on this point about people is to say that we're talking about the challenges, but what I really want to emphasize is that it is a spectacular learning, and we want to encourage unlearning experience as well too. I'm actually going through this in a different way because I have a niece who's fairly young, but she's a founder CEO of a company in San Francisco. So it's one thing to work with young founders, another to have it as a relative and sort of watching the process. Because most founders I haven't seen from birth, but so I have a brother who's 12 years older than me, but he still thinks of me as a little kid because he's 12 years above me. So with that, the advice we want to give for startups really is to just keep in mind that startups is a journey, and that the company will need to reinvent itself at different parts along the journey here, and we try to simplify it by creating these stages. And that as the journey, if you're doing a startup, that the key link is finding go-to-market fit. And so with that, you have this sort of repeatable, predictable, scalable formula from growth. And if you're a B2B company, you find it, you become very hot. So you go from something that people are not really interested in, and everyone wants to invest in you, is when you find that inflection point. And then on a personal basis is that we hope that by understanding the journey of a company, you can sort of better anticipate how your role is going to change, but more importantly, what skills that you need to unlearn to progress to the next stage. And that the other thing that we're hoping, and most importantly in the book, is that by describing these kind of questions and concerns, is that as founders and others read it, they realize that they're not the only ones that are facing these problems, but these are sort of standard problems in the company journey. So with that, I just want to end with one last thing, since you're dealing with students here, and we've got 2 kids around your age, so they come to me for advice and so forth, is that, if you're looking at career in the business side, I would say, as the generation coming out of school right now, it's a fantastic opportunity. On one hand, when you come out and start a company, you're going to think, this is what I tell our kids is, when you join a company, you're going to feel like you're you're surrounded by these very powerful creatures. In other words, they have all the experience, they have the status, they have resources. The older generation in these companies, you're going to think, they have everything. On the flip side, and the thing I'd like to point out is that the world is going through such a disruption right now in terms of technologies, business models, and other things, that there's such a disruption going on, is that instead of thinking as the established as sort of an all-powerful group, in essence, right now, it's like this transition of what you see with the mammals versus the dinosaurs, is that the old way of doing things is not going to work. There are a lot of people that come out and are saying that because of the digital disruption, the digital transformation right now, half of the Fortune 500 will disappear. So there are all this sort of going on as people are seeing this disruption, and what you have the benefit of as sort of recent graduates is being much closer to understanding that disruption. I'll give you one example of many years ago when the personal computer first came out. So this was quite a while ago. Personal computer came out. A friend of mine joined Goldman Sachs at that point, and in 1 year he became the superstar at Goldman Sachs. And the reason is that before, as they were doing financial calculations, they would have to do everything manually. Well, with a personal computer, he could do spreadsheets really well. So imagine if you're the first person to really do financial models with spreadsheets while everyone is doing this by hand. There is a major impact in terms of what you can do. So that's a specific example, but I think right now with what we're seeing in social, what we're seeing in mobile, in all these different areas of how people collaborate, communicate, you're really at the cusp. And so I want to emphasize here is that if you do join a company, a more established institution, whatever, it's easy to just look at the quote appearance of power, but the key is don't be intimidated, but instead figure out how to leverage these new paradigms and tools, because you're in the best position to basically help that organization transition through this disruption that we're going through. Well, I hope this has been helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions that people may have as well. Thank you. Thank you.
So if you all want to think of some questions, does anybody have questions to start? Yeah, way back there.
Where was the hand?
So you
brought up the example you did that the CEO will probably need to change the need to change over time.
Mhm.
Are there any roles in the early stages of companies that are largely invariant, such that they remain the same?
Well, at the executive role, they all change. And I would say even the board role changes too. So, when I work with companies, how I work, I view my own role as a board member changing through those stages as well too. And, how I get involved and how I ask for information, how I relate is also very different as in those different stages. I'm not saying every single role changes, but in terms of executive and board, where I spend my time, I see that changing. Yeah, so that is the biggest question here is that as the role is changing, do you replace the person or do you help the person change, right? That's really the question you're asking. And that's like one of the hardest questions that a leader has. And frankly, one of the reasons why we're writing this book is that what we're hoping is that there are not that many books or other things outside right now that will help people anticipate how the role is going to change, and so you know what to do. So I figure the first thing to do is to help people anticipate how and why it's changing. Okay, so that's one. And then the second is that what we talk about by interviewing and our experience, we bring in other people's experience too, is how can you predict whether a person is going to change or not? And so there are different tests that you can try on that basis. But fundamentally, some people are not able to go through that change, and then the question becomes, well, you may decide not to, but then that will definitely could have a major impact on the company's ability to succeed. And so then what happens is that other executives start leaving because then they say the CEO is not decisive and the board is not decisive. And the company performance does slip. Oh, yes, be happy to do that.
So when we were trying to create a 3D product, how early product development stage how much should the product be? Is there like a balance?
Because like perfect, but if you go too late, you might be.
I'm sorry, the question is how mature should the product be before what? Before?
Start seeking for like customers to adopt it in.
Yeah, a lot of people actually talk to customers before they even build the product. So in other words, so the question is how mature should your product be before trying to get customers? And many times people start with a small group of teaching customers to help them define and build the product.
Thank you. Over here.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. At the beginning of a startup, sometimes the roles can get a little bit mixed.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, how can you elaborate a little bit more about the importance of differentiating the VP of sales with the CEO, and what should each of them be focused during the beginning of the startup?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the startup, you're absolutely right. Its roles are very fluid, and people play hybrid roles. And so that's normally how it just is, because a company may not have enough money to have specialized roles. And a good example is that you could have a person who helps, is a technical person acquiring when you're trying to acquire customers. That's like a sales engineer. And after you close and the customer, and you have to onboard, keep them happy, that they can do post-sales support too, and that's customer success. And so you typically in a startup, you'll have people that play pre-sales and post-sales report. After the company gets above a certain stage, those become different roles. So some will only do pre-sales, and some will do post-sales, and so forth. And there are different executives on different sides. So you're right in the beginning, you have hybrid roles that then need to split and become specialized. The role between the VP of sales and CEO of an early stage startup really depends on, I would say, the background of a CEO. You know, if you have a CEO with a strong sales background, they're going to work very closely. If you have a CEO that's never been in sales before, but has been on the technical side, the VP of sales will have a much more strategic role as well. So it really depends on what we found is the match between the two.
Thank you.
We have a question.
It helps a little bit if you just state your name and kind of what you're studying, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay, hi, I'm Katerina. I'm studying political economy, and I have a three-part question. Why did you decide to leave your job as a lawyer? Also, do you think your law degree helped you in your work in venture capitalists and in the business field? And if you did it all again, would you go to law school?
Whether I would go to law school again, I mean, first of all, I think going to law school was very helpful, so I don't take that back. It wasn't what I initially had planned on doing. So in a way, as I said, it was a compromise with my father. So like in my case, when I went to law school, I didn't know what like Brown versus School Board of Education was. I didn't know any of the constitutional law cases or what a tort was. I was a very hardcore applied math major. So going to law school was like learning a foreign language. So from that perspective, I'm not sure I would do it again. On the other hand, it was very helpful for me. And what enabled me to do was sort of understand how deals got made. So what happened is that after law school, I came out here and started at Wilson Sonsini, made partner there, and we started Venture Law Group. And so during that time period as an attorney, I would work with about 20 to 30 startups, new startups every year. And so ended up working with several hundred startups. And so in a way, it allowed me to just understand the whole startup process a lot better. As a lawyer, a corporate lawyer, I felt my role was almost like a family doctor. And so I'd go to board meetings, I talked to the CEO, and so they would tell me all these sort of ideas and sort of get to know them really well and so forth. As soon as I became a VC, even the same people I know that I invested in, I would have a very different relationship with. The amount of information I got was much more filtered. So the roles were different. But I enjoyed it, and it helped me, as I say, understanding the startup journey and you know, what the dynamics and how to do deals.
Over here. Hi, thank you for your time. I was just wondering, when you said you had to unlearn when you're moving between roles, is it still important to keep some of the information that you did learn when you were in your previous role? And on top of that, did you find you had to learn and unlearn your roles when moving from your ventures outside of being a venture capitalist? Like,
so I'll give you a story, a personal story in my case about learning and unlearning as an attorney. Okay. So when I started off as an attorney, I went straight through college and law school. So I was 25 years old. I looked like I was 16. And I was negotiating this deal with a client. And the deal structure wasn't going to work. So I said, it's not going to work. Let's try doing it this way. The CEO basically looked at me and says, you're a young flake. You don't know what you're doing. Just listen. And we're going to try to do it this way. The deal didn't work because I knew it was flawed. About a month later, a similar situation, but different client. At that time, in Silicon Valley, as a young attorney, you just got to work with a lot of startups. So, this was my next case. So similar situation, and this time I decided that, well, the old technique didn't work. I was called a young flake. So this time I'll try something different. So this time, instead of saying it's not going to work, I said, well, how should we handle this case? And so sort of started talking about it in an indirect manner. And then 20 minutes later, everyone's getting frustrated. They know it's not working, all this. So I said, why don't we do it this way? And they go, wow, that's great. You must be a young genius. So I went from a young flake to a young genius in like 30 minutes, So I learned in that case sort of how to present indirectly, right? That was basically the whole point, was how to present indirectly. Then later on, I became a partner in the board meeting, and similar kind of situation. They're asking me for advice and all this. And I'm trying to do it indirectly, and then the person who's a very established business person at the time basically said, just stop that, just tell me the bottom line. Just wanted the direct answer. So, the direct approach that didn't work, and so I had to learn the indirect approach, and then later on, because my role changed, I had to change, and then the approach had to change to go to direct. Yes.
Hello, nice to meet you. My name is Michael Wu, studying computer science. So first of all, great presentation. My question is, out of the so many companies that you've invested in that LinkedIn can't even display, what are the top 3 qualities that you look for when you choose what company to invest in?
Yeah. So now for me, if it's a company I'm going to join the board or so forth, I look at, since we invest early, it's going to be like a 5 to 7 year journey. It's not like a 6-month venture, but a 5 to 7 year journey. And so I'm asking myself, do I really want to be part of the journey for 5 to 7 years? And so related to that is that is this going back to the wave example? I'm looking for a situation where I believe it's going to be like a new tidal wave. And I deal with mostly first-time founder CEOs, so a person I think that can surf the wave. So it really comes down to those two and tying to whether I want to be part of the journey. So it's like a 3-part test.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Andy. So my question is, how do you decide what companies you'd want to be the board of directors for?
It's really those sort of 3 things now. Do I really want to be part of the journey? Do I believe that this will be a tidal wave in the future? And then third is, a founder CEO that I believe in.
Question up front.
Hi, I'm Paulo. I'm from the industrial engineering department, and thanks for your presentation. And just a question about the culture of a company. With that changing process, how much do you think it has an influence on the culture of the company, and how the employees can follow that and to be everyone on the same page?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Culture definitely evolves as the company evolves, and it needs to. However, what we found is that great culture serves as the foundation for all this change. I mean, this whole talk was about company changing dramatically through each stage, about people needing to change as the company goes through these changes. And it sounds very chaotic. But what really holds it all together is if you have a very strong culture within the company that explains basically why people should work together, how people should work together, and makes people more interested in the success of the company than for them personally as well too. And so there are different aspects of that culture that you want to create to help the company go through this journey. Because in every journey, there's ups and downs and tough times. So if you don't have a good culture, then that's what holds people together through the challenges. But at the same time, it's usually not a static culture.
So thank you for taking us through your journey. I know that there are more questions. I'm hoping that you can stay for a few minutes more. And what happens at the end of the class is that we put up a post to track attendance and also feedback. So if you could stay, it's so interesting to hear from you. You've got so much experience to offer. So thank you very, very much.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity. Enjoyed it. Thank you.